So who was able to successfully refactor their app, the starter code? Okay, so Matt and Alejandro maybe. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna walk through it together. I'm gonna refactor mine, and we'll talk through it. I'll give you guys a little bit of a hint. If you have the README open, the lesson README for today, my lesson, scroll down to the very bottom, and there's a drop-down section called Setup Solution. So we're going to walk through that as well. I would highly ask you not to copy that code. Actually, the actual route, you can just copy that and dump it into a new file. But the vars and requires and such, I would, if you're going to use that code, I would just ask you to type it out manually. We always try to impress that. Cool, so let me share my screen and let's walk through refactoring mine, and you guys can help me out with it. So here's my version of our app. So what's the first step that you guys did in the refactor? And I can't see everyone, so if you want to put it into Slack or don't be shy, just come on mic and yell it out. So what's my first step if I want to get this route and all the following to-do routes into a separate file? What would that process look like?
First, you need to make the file to put it into.
Nice. Yeah, the first thing I'm going to do, so I'm not sharing my terminal, but you're going to see a folder pop up in Atom. The first thing I'm going to do is make dir, I always love that word, controllers. So that'll create a controllers file. Today we're only playing around with to-dos, but consider if we were also going to add a resource of users or a resource of, I don't know, comments, like maybe you want folks to comment on a given to-do. That's really stretching the boundaries of a basic to-do app, but if we have any other resource, we would dump it into this controllers directory. The next thing I'm going to do is touch that todos.js file. And sometimes, sometimes you may want to call this, oops, I didn't do the right directory. Sometimes you may want to call this, particularly when we get to Angular, we're probably going to call these files more specifically like to-dos controller or users controller. So just FYI, you could call it to-dos, or if you have a really complex app, you may want to call it specifically to-dos controller, because you're going to have, eventually we're going to have like a to-dos.js model file. You may have several instances of that file name, although they're in different directories. So eventually it may make sense to try to be a little bit more specific for what it's worth. Let me delete that file and move it to the, actually just let me move it to the correct folder. Okay, there we go. So I just moved it to my controllers file. So there it is right there. So let me go ahead and open that up. Nice. So kind of the heart of this exercise, the first step, I'm going to go ahead and just grab the index route. I'm just going to cut that out because I don't want to retype it. And just for starters, I'm just going to pop that into my todos.js. Cool. So that's a pretty solid step one. What would be another step that I need to do? So I need to add some logic. I need to add some more code to my todos.js file. What do we need to add to import our Express router? Burger Heaven. I didn't even realize that. Yeah, this is probably kind of an offshoot of a similar like recipe app or something. So I guess a Burger Heaven app may be a little more exciting than to-dos, but in any event. So somebody help me out. What's some other code that I need to add to my todos.js?
You need to require Express in your to-dos.
Right. So I definitely need to remember that Express isn't necessarily application-wide. Any place that we want to use or attach methods and properties to that Express object, we just need to bring it into each individual file. So yeah, so let's bring in Express just like we did in server.js. Cool. What else do I need to put in here? Yeah, and Matt's on the right track. We're going to do that next. We're definitely going to need to link these files. So Colin's giving us a little background on Burger Heaven. So what is another line of code that I need to put into my todos.js file? Cool. Yeah, thanks, David. So we also need to bring in our router. Kind of the convention is to just name it router. And then remember that router is actually a method on Express. So we can call express.router. We're going to create a new instance. We're going to talk about constructor functions on Monday. And this is kind of a constructor, like we're creating a new instance of a router here. All right, so we're requiring Express, we're bringing in our router. What's the final piece of the puzzle that we need to add in this todos.js file? How are we going to get all of this information out of todos.js and let our server.js file know about it? What's the process for that?
Module exports.
Yeah, module.exports. What is, like in your own words, what does that do? What is module.exports?
It's exporting the module to the other part of the file, the other part of the program.
Yeah. Yeah, so module.exports is a really handy pattern. And so we're essentially, when we call this, when we require this todos.js here in a moment in server.js, it's going to be a big fancy object, pretty much called, it's pretty much going to be the router object. That's what we're exporting. But you can export all kinds of stuff. When we get to database, we'll be creating schemas and such next week, models. And so you guys are going to be seeing this module.exports pattern much more going forward. All right, I think we're good with todos.js. So let's go clean up server.js. So Matt was on the right track. We need to require this external file. And so I'm going to call this todos, oops. I'm going to call this todos controller. Just trying to be semantic. And we'll require that file. We need to make sure that the path is correct. Cool. So essentially now var todos controller is going to be equaling the router. So this is kind of the same thing when we use module.exports. This is the same thing as saying like that, essentially. Now that todos controller variable is going to equal this router. It's now an object. And so we can call whatever we need to in that way using module.exports. Cool. All right, there was semicolon on that. What else do we need to clean up here? What else am I missing? So we're requiring that todos controller file. What else do we need to do as far as like configuring how our routes need to be written? There's some more code we need to
change app to router.
Okay, but before we go back to our todos.js file, yeah, so David's on the right track. We need to use app.use, and then we're going to tell Express, hey, when you get a request at /todos, go to my todos controller and find the appropriate route. That's why we're putting all the to-do specific routes in this external file. What is .use an example of? What did we call .use?
Middleware.
Middleware.
Yeah. Yeah, so .use is considered middleware, and Express has a lot of great middleware functionality. We're kind of just scratching the surface of that stuff. But yeah, so hey, Express, if you get a request at /todos, you're going to find all of the appropriate routes in this todos controller variable. And then the todos controller variable is actually pointing to our todos.js file. So that's how that works. Now it's really handy that here on line 14 that we go ahead and do that /todos. So whenever we get a /todos, we're going to look into this other file. So what do I need to do to my first route? Well, actually our only route that we built so far. what would I need to do to refactor the literal route here?
Take out the do's part?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so now this is just going to be /, because when we go to / to-dos, you can already assume that every route in this file is already going to have that prefix on it. So we don't need to repeat ourselves. Someone direct messaged me because they were having to type this into the browser. They're having to do like localhost : 3000, whatever. So if you come into that situation, you probably just didn't like configure this correctly. So that's another way that we can dry up our code. So now we don't have to be redundant. We can just get rid of that. So we don't have to type to-dos every time we're creating a new to-do route, because we already told Express via this middleware, the / to-dos is going to take you to all of these routes. Whew, okay. So I think it was Mike earlier. What's another thing that we need to update here on our todos.js file?
You need to change the app to router, but also that wouldn't match, right? Because then it would be localhost 3000 to-dos / instead of. Because you would require the / after to-dos to get to that location.
Let's check it out. I think this will be okay, but let's just test it. Do I need to fix anything else in here? Am I missing anything?
No, I think that's
Okay.
good.
So my NodeMon server is running. So luckily I have not had to touch my server, which is pretty sweet. So let me screen share my browser and let's make sure that this is working the way that we want it to. Again, we should be getting the same behavior in Chrome. The only thing we did is refactor it, which is really going to be handy going forward. So can you guys see my browser here, my to-dos? Okay, so moment of truth, let me hit refresh. And there we go. So no news is good news in this case. We have successfully set up, we've refactored our app, and so we're now in a pretty good dry state going forward. Yeah, and then Mike, to answer your question, if I'm understanding you correctly, we couldn't create a route with an empty string. That really would break. It wouldn't go anywhere. So we at least need that / to do. But the way that the URL is rendered, we don't have to put that / after it. Obviously, if we're gonna, we're gonna create a new form here shortly. So when we do that, we'll need to put the / and such. But this / in our router.get, I'm not sharing my Atom anymore. Let me go back to Atom. Yeah, so this / in get, that's going to be like the beginning / for this route. So it's going to be, / to-dos, and then that /.
Would router.use work? Like would I put?
Well, router.use wouldn't work because use is middleware. .get is an HTTP method, right? So this is specifically a GET request. We're telling our Express router, when you receive a GET request from / to-dos right here. So this isn't middleware. This is an actual route that we created. So .use wouldn't work there. Remember that middleware, the point of middleware, it takes care of anything that we want to do in between the request and the response object. So certain things, actually, if you take a look at this app, if you go back into server.js, we have something here, an NPM module called Morgan, for example. So Morgan is a really handy NPM module that helps if you want to log information, again, in between that request and response. Let's say that we wanted to log what that request looks like more specifically, or if we wanted to do some sort of data checking, we could use Morgan. Other things that you would want to do with middleware is maybe, when I send a request to Facebook, Facebook needs to make sure that I'm logged in, that I've been authenticated, and that I'm only able to access my own profile, right? Or if I log into my bank account, obviously Chase doesn't want to give me the ability to access other people's accounts. So somewhere in the middle between my requesting information and them returning information with the response, they're going to want to just sanity check that I am who I say I am, and that I have many, many tens of dollars in my bank account. All right.
I guess I just asked because I saw that kind of pattern to use. For
Where did
404 errors, because you're trying to check pretty much if nothing above it caught that URL, that it's going to default to that .use function.
And so that would
I used it here and it worked because there's no slash. It's just defaulting to that router.use. I don't know if that's proper syntax.
That may work, but I wouldn't use that. I think maybe if you want to create some sort of custom 404, it may make sense to like have like kind of a last chance route. So let's say that they enter in, instead of going to /to-dos, let's say that they try to go to like /hamburgers. We don't have a /hamburgers route. So if we wanted to give the user some sort of specific information or a specific 404, you see that all the time, right? GitHub has a cool little Star Wars 404 message. So maybe if we wanted to do that, maybe you want to have kind of a fail-safe, kind of a route of last resort if nothing else fits the route pattern. That's not a bad thing to do. But for building routes, I mean, we do have a to-dos route with to-dos data. I would absolutely use a .git for that. I'd love to see where you saw that. Maybe that was in the lesson yesterday. But you may want to use that as kind of like a catch-all, like worst case scenario error route, but I wouldn't do it for any of the routing that we're doing for our CRUD actions.
Got it.
Great, so give me a thumbs up in Slack if you successfully refactored, because I want to make sure that we're in a good spot before we move forward adding our CRUD functionality. So I'm going to stop my screen share and let me put a prompt into Slack. Okie dokie. I can get my spelling right today. Just give me a quick thumbs up if you've successfully refactored the app so we can move forward. Okay. See 5 thumbs ups. How about this? Just on camera, if anyone needs some assistance. Okay. Kieran has an error message. Who else has an error message? Who else is not working? I see. Okay, 6 thumbs ups. Okay, let me give you kind of the next exercise prompt. And I'll keep you guys here in the room to do this. And while you guys are working on this, Kieran, you can share your screen and I'll help you out. What I want you guys to do, so I already gave you guys handlebars and a basic index view. So just a little bit of handlebars / JavaScript practice. Go into that index.hbs view and using handlebars, add some code that shows us how many to-dos we have. And so write some code in that view template that will say you have 2 to-dos. Step 2, I want you guys to add a new to-do or many to-dos, as many as you want, to that var seeded to-dos array that's now in our router.get, our index route. So just take a few minutes and do that. So if you add another to-do to our array and you refresh the browser page, it should say you have 3 to-dos. So work on those 2 exercises. And then Kieran, do you want to share your screen, take a peek? Okay, so go back to your browser. Let's make sure. Okay, we got the right path. Let's go to your server logs. So go to the terminal. Okay, so Kieran, what's the issue here? What are we doing? What do we need to fix? So you're trying to run nodemon server.js, but give me an ls command. I don't see a server.js there. So what do we need to do? Nope. Nope. Server.js is the correct file. But where is that file? What folder are you currently in? There you go. Yeah, try it now. Okay, so server.js line 14, so your middleware is not working. Specifically, it says app is not defined. So let's go to your server.js file. And what are we missing from this file? So Kieran, can you come on mic for a sec? So remember in Zoom, if you open up your Zoom window, actually you're sharing your screen, so maybe a little different. Okay, so let's go to the terminal. So we need to get into a good habit of reading our error messages. So let's go to the terminal. Literally, what is the error telling you? Reference error, app is not defined. So start at the top of the stack and read down. It'll also give you line numbers. So it tells you it's failing on server.js line 14. That's the first line. But it's literally looking for a reference to app, and it says app is undefined. So without even looking like at the README or at the code, like what would that suggest? If something is undefined, what would you think?
I would think that I haven't defined logger.
Well, go back to the error message. Specifically, what is it telling you?
Reference error, app is not defined.
Yeah, it's not even getting to logger. And look, if you look right above that message, go back to the terminal. Look above where it says app.use. See, it even gives you a handy little arrow there. You see that?
Yeah.
It's literally blowing up on the A in the word app. It can't find app. So the note is correct. We have not defined it. And so I think what you did, look on line 9. And I think what you did is you put that router code in the wrong file. And I think you replaced var app.
Yes.
Yeah. So just clean that up and I think you'll be fine. But the bigger point is, and I know that Collins mentioned this, and I don't think we can be redundant enough, like don't ignore the error messages. If something blows up, the first place you should look is your server log. The second place you should look, if you're dealing with client side and browser stuff, is look in the dev tools in the console. Those are like the first places to look. And if you look at this error message, this is a super helpful error message. I know it looks kind of like garbage. It's not the prettiest looking thing, but it tells you on the first line, the line in server.js that it's breaking on, which is super helpful, right? So that's the needle in the haystack right there.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of work, backwards from there. So you're also getting that same reference error, router is not defined, on line 18.
I changed the apps to router, and then Let's see.
Be sure to save your file, right?
Oh yeah. All right, now what? App set is not a function.
Throw a I don't think this is breaking it, but on line 15, throw a semicolon at the end of that.
It's still on line 9. Look at what you're setting your var app equal to.
Oh yeah. Yeah, good catch.
Okay. Var app equal to express router. And
So how do we instantiate a new instance of Express? We're not trying to instantiate express.router in this file. We're trying to create a new instance of Express. So what do we need to get rid of there?
the router?
Yeah. Yeah, I just think you were putting this code into this file instead of todos.js. And you probably don't need the dot there. Okay.
Ah. There we go.
Nice. So, Kieran, I'm just curious, did you type that in longhand in server.js, or were you maybe copying from the lesson?
So I was going down the yesterday's lesson and copying and trying to follow that. And actually Mike asked that question too. And you answered it, but I didn't quite get it because yesterday we changed all the apps to router.
Right. But my question, let's make sure that, Colin alluded to this yesterday. Let's make sure, unless we kind of ask you or tell you it's cool to like copy code, we really got to insist that you will type it out longhand and even talk out loud. Colin mentioned that yesterday. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but it really is helpful because the only way this is going to sink in is by actually doing it. Copy and pasting it's not going to help at all. So if it's some large piece of code, yeah.
The only thing I copied and pasted was this from here.
Okay.
And then I changed, well, I had all the apps changed to router. And then I changed them back again.
Yeah. That's cool. Just making sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
I guess I'll just share my screen to like double check that I'm not saying some, because I don't really know what I'm saying.
Okay.
So I'll just show you. This part right here, rest.render. So before I had taken this out and it was breaking over here. So is this just the path to the file .index over here?
Exactly. So
how is it's different from this one up here because it's not a view.
Res.render is the response object in that route, right?
Okay.
So look in Atom. So in this particular app, in the views folder, I gave you guys a to-dos folder. So again, as you guys get more complex,
to-dos.
you're going to have a users folder for all of your user views. Each resource is going to have its own folder. So we really want to get in the habit of drying up and modularizing our stuff. So yeah, so you need to go in the to-dos folder and grab the index view that belongs to to-dos. Because the reason that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Let's say that you have a to-dos resource and a users resource. They're both going to have an index action and an index view. How do you know if this is the index view for users or the index view for to-dos? Well, because it's going to be in the specific folder. So we need to get... Yep.
Just to clarify, because when I originally did this, I was taking out this to-dos, right? And this was breaking when I refreshed. So I added the to-dos because I was looking at what was, oh my gosh, what did I just do? I looked at what index was, so I saw that it was here. So it was in this folder. So for example, let's say they had users, like you said, I would do user/to.index in here. In the render, if I was in a different view, like
Yes,
if I was in users.js.
Yes, you would create a users folder in views, and you would put that index.hbs for users inside the views users folder. Therefore, the res.render would be users/index. Yeah, there's no secret sauce going on here. It's literally that, remember that handlebars looks in the views folder? So we added a to-dos folder so we could just keep our resources partitioned. So we're just going into the to-dos folder and finding that specific index. Yeah, so just keep in mind as we go through the course, and even next week, we're going to be adding more files, more complexity to your project. So it's going to be really key to really pay attention and think about the paths and why things are set up hierarchically the way that they are. And you'll get more comfortable with that. But as our apps get more complex, we need to make sure that we put things in the correct spot so we know where to find them. So this is just kind of a first step. Cool. So I want to move forward. We still have not really gotten to our content. So does anyone want to quickly share their screen and maybe walk us through how to add the number of to-dos to that view? Does someone want to quickly kind of walk us through that? Did anyone get that working?
Yeah,
So it says like you have. Yeah.
Or Matt can go.
Go ahead.
So, am I unmuted? Cool. So basically what I did is I changed the header to say you have and then to-dos.length to actually count out each of the to-dos that we have here. And I added each of these, extra ones to update it. So if I remove this, save it, it'll reflect here on the webpage.
Cool. Yeah, so really the key, do you have your index.hbs open?
There we go.
Only just a little bit of practice. So remember that whatever's in between those handlebars, we can call JavaScript methods and properties, right? So yeah, just doing a to-dos.length is totally valid. So very nice. Cool. All right. Well, that was kind of a little bit of a, just a little bit of a warm up before we hop into the stuff, a little bit of a review of yesterday. Does anyone have any questions about the router module, handlebars, anything from this morning so far? Cool. Well, let's move forward. Let's walk through this next section, then I'll give you guys like a 5-minute break or so. But let's use module.exports to help dry up our code even further. So in server.js, well, now it's in our to-dos.js, we had that array of seeded to-dos, right? As our app grows in size and complexity, we'll want to move logic out of server.js and try to dry it up as much as we can. One method for doing so is by using an object called module.exports, which you guys are hopefully pretty savvy on already. Module.exports is something we're going to use a lot more next week as we create models and schemas and work with our database. So we're just going to try to, get a little bit of a mimic of that with this exercise right here. So module.exports allows us to separate our JS files by exposing their contents as one global variable. The global variable isn't assigned until we use that require, till we require the file. So let me share my screen. You guys can follow along if you want. There's only maybe 2 steps here. So I'm going to share my Atom. And let's just dry up our seeded to-dos variable and get another example of using module.exports. Module.exports is really handy. You can use it for a lot of cool stuff. So let's start in our to-dos.js file. So you guys should have a seeded to-dos variable with that array. You may have added a few more to-dos. I still have my 2 janky ones. But if you look here in Atom, I already gave you guys a file called data.js. So let me move that up here. So just think of this data.js file as, you know, kind of a little container where we're going to put our hard-coded seeded to-dos. A lot of times in frameworks, this is actually referred to as a seed file, because oftentimes you'll have some seed data or some initial data that you don't want to type in manually. You don't want to deal with the database portion. Just let me run a command. It'll read this file and just create a bunch of new to-dos or create a bunch of new users right out of the box. So this is called data.js. So let's move that seeded to-dos array. Let's dry it up and put it into this data.js file. So go ahead, and this is a good instance. I give you permission to copy. Just go ahead and copy your seeded to-dos, or actually just cut it out of there. Cut out that seeded to-dos array, and then just pop it inside of your module.exports object, like so. Now, Adam's already barfing at me. So if you recall, module.exports is just an empty object container that we can add properties and methods to. So since this is an object, we actually need to make seeded to-dos. We just need to refactor it a little bit and turn it into a property of module.exports. So essentially, this is like typing in module.exports. I know I misspelled that. Seeded to-dos. So that's how we could call this technically. Cool. So we move that data out there to kind of dry it up. The next thing we need to do is we need to import this data into our application. And the way kind of the partner, you know, step with the module.exports is using that require method. So let's go into server.js. And now we just need to require that file, that data.js. So I'll just put it down here. I'll put it below to-dos controller. So go ahead and create a variable, and we'll call this data. You could call this to-dos, you know, you could call it what you wanted, but again, just to make sure we're consistent with the lesson today, I'm going to call this data. And then go ahead and require that file. And it's in the home directory. It's kind of in the parent directory. So the path should just be data.js. Like so. Cool. So we dumped some data into data.js. We've now required the file. The last thing we need to do is update our response object here in todos.js. So our render is rendering the correct view, but now we got rid of that seeded to-dos array. So we just need to update this. So if you want to put this into Slack, how would you suggest, how are we going to get to our seeded to-dos now? Because seeded to-dos is now going to be contained in this global variable called data. So what will we need to update here to grab those seeded to-dos now? Close. Yeah, so Alan says require data in your todos.js. We actually shouldn't have to do that because since we're requiring the data file in our server.js, it should be global at this point. That's a really good point though. We should be able to, we should not have to do that in this case. Yeah, let's throw a data in front of this now. Let's try data.seeded to-dos. Because we still kept the same, you know, property name of seeded to-dos equals the array. And then let me refresh my browser. And make sure this is wired up correctly. Give me 1 second. fix my syntax here. I think I misspelled something, so give me 1 sec. Give me 1 second. Yeah, we shouldn't have to put data into do's.js. I think I may have the order wrong here, so let me make sure I have data in the right directory. Data.js, make sure I called it correctly. Yeah, all that looks good. Okay, why don't we do this? Take a quick 5-minute break. I'm gonna straighten this out. I think it's something really minor. I'll stop my screen share for the moment. Is everyone else having, it can't find the data object? Yeah, let me just make sure I didn't update something incorrectly. But take a 5-minute break. We'll come back and we'll get this straightened out. So come on back at 12:48.
My problem seems to be a semicolon after the bracket in data.js. Well,
A semicolon after, yeah, I'm sure it's something like semantic. I'm just, I may have mistyped. I am prone to do that for sure, even with the 4K monitor.
need a 4K keyboard.
I know, right?
I know you said that's not what we were supposed to do, but that did fix it.
Sorry, Mike, what was that? What fixed it?
I put it in Slack, the requiring data.js, that solved it. Now it's rendering correctly.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that. Huh, I must have left that out. I thought that was a little wonky because when we deal with, when we get into databases next week, we're gonna have to require like the model file and the schema file. Yeah, so my bad.
So you don't normally need that? Or?
No, you are correct. You do need to require that.
Okay, I just did it
I don't
as a
know
guess.
why. Yeah, I ran through this lesson even this weekend and it worked fine. I guess maybe I put it in there but didn't put it in the lesson plan, so I apologize. But thanks for yeah, it's a good heads up. Yeah,
because you have it in the number 2 on your screenshot, so I just tried it. But maybe it was supposed to be ... because you're going up a level.
Well, no, on step 2 it says to put it in server.js.
Oh,
Did you put it in server.js or
no? I put it in to-dos.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just listening in on you guys, but if it's a global variable, wouldn't it not need to be required because it's global? It's supposed to be able to be called and just be a variable that you can reference?
Well, yes and no. So consider that even Express, right? When we do var express, or when we do, var app, sorry, when we even import the Express module using require, if we're going to use it in a particular file, we still need to add it to that file. I think it just has to do with the way that Express compiles all of those files and minifies it. But yeah, you would think if it's a global variable, then why can't everything access it? But consider it also has to do with maybe the load order of those files. So depending on, I'd have to look under the hood at the exact order that Express loads the program. But if it looks for that, for example, if it looks for that var app global variable, but it hasn't been declared until like the next file, it's still not going to know about it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And luckily, one of the great benefits, we're going to talk about Rails in Unit 4. I know that we've mentioned this, but Express is very unopinionated in that if you look at tutorials, look at blog articles, you're going to see several different ways that people like to set up their Node and Express apps. Compare that to Rails, which is very opinionated and very user-friendly. There's usually like one way to do it in Rails, and it pretty much scaffolds out everything for you. That's one of the reasons that Rails is so popular, and one of the reasons that we teach it. And by the time we get to it at the end of the course, you guys are going to be so slick at this stuff. Rails is going to be a breeze. But Rails takes all of this configuration out of your hands. Rails's motto is convention over configuration. So some very smart folks that maintain the Rails source code, they just all agree, hey, let's put all of our files in this order. Let's require things in this order. So Rails has already done all of that configuration for you. So as long as you play in their sandbox by their rules, it's going to be a breeze. And that's one reason that a lot of our students get Rails gigs, because if you go to a Rails shop, you're going to be 80% to understanding the code base. Compared to if you go to a mean stack shop or a node shop, chances are they may have set stuff up and structured their apps in a much more unopinionated way. And so it may take a little bit more time to get comfortable with that code base. But anyway, that's one great reason to use Rails. There's also a lot of mean stack generators out there. We don't use generators in class because it's much more helpful to learn how to build this stuff from the ground up. But once you get a comfort level, it is definitely more efficient to use generators that will already bake in the folder structure, bake in authentication for you if you wish. So, but there's great benefit to learning this stuff, you know, hand by hand. It's like going under the hood of your car and knowing how to like tinker with things, you know, as opposed to taking it to the mechanic yourself. So it's very powerful. Cool.
I know for me, and I know that clarifies a little bit, because I was just, when we were going through it even, I was telling Karen, I was like, when we did the thing yesterday, I'm like, wait, so we did all of that to learn that there's a different way? And I didn't understand the unopinionated part when I was looking up the definition for express and everything. And I'm like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure yet. But that helps me get a little bit more level understanding.
Yeah, well, keep in mind that JavaScript is definitely more of an intermediate language, and all of the libraries and modules are definitely more intermediate as well. But I probably mentioned this earlier this week, you know, even in the lessons on Tuesday, a couple of places, the lesson plan said index versus server. So we as a team, given how unopinionated JavaScript is, we try really hard to agree, okay, let's name everything server.js. Let's put everything with this folder structure. And not a lot of markets do that, but we try really hard, because I know it's hard as a beginner. It's hard to learn it if you see it in many different ways. So we try really hard to at least show you one way. That being said, you are in kind of a utopia right now. When you get into the real world, not everything's going to be structured nice and neatly where you expect it. And so you do need that second level of understanding and knowing how things work and why they are where they are. And you'll get there for sure. But we try our best to make it be as consistent as possible for you guys. Okay, well, welcome back. So Mike made a really good point. I'll update the README, but to get this thing up and running, add that line of code. I'll place it in as well. We do indeed need to add a data variable and require that data file in our todos.js. So I'm going to put this into Slack. This is especially going to come in, this is especially going to be important next week when we add a database layer. So we're going to be requiring a lot of stuff in various files. So props to Mike for straightening this out. And my apologies for leaving that out of the lesson plan. But yeah, if you add this data require and then the data.js, remember that we need to add that dot at the beginning of this path because it's a relative path, right? So data.js lives in a different folder than our todos.js. So we just need to make sure that it's the two dots for relative path. And then we should be in good shape. And then if you refresh the browser, Again, we haven't changed any of the behavior of the app yet. I promise we're going to get to that next. So far, what we've been doing is just refactoring and getting familiar and comfortable with how to set up our app going forward. Because consider for your projects, you're probably going to have, maybe a user and then maybe 2 other model types. And so it's really good just to get comfortable with how you want to set your stuff up in a sensible way. Okay, cool. Give me a thumbs up. You can just do it on camera. If you add that line of code to your todos.js and you're able to render your 2 to-dos. So we should be getting the same behavior, just to-dos, description, get beer and such. Okay, cool. So let's move forward. Again, kind of the point of today is to learn more about routing. There's something specifically called RESTful routing, and there's 7 RESTful routes. So we're going to talk about that convention. It's pretty much cross-language and cross-framework. So this RESTful routing convention is going to apply when we get to Rails, if you're working in, LAMP stack, PHP or something. So it's going to be pretty similar. And then we're actually going to build some more forms and routes today. So to start, what is RESTful routing? Who has heard of that term, RESTful routing, before? Okay. It's a little confusing for sure. And again, if it doesn't sink in right now today, this is what we're going to be doing for the rest of the course, because this very much applies to full stack applications. So in general, programming is very free form, right? It's kind of unopinionated. There are many solutions and many possible and perfectly acceptable answers in means of solving problems, and you guys have already experienced that. However, Express is a framework and has opinions about how we should write our code. Similarly, over the past 20 years or so, programmers have developed several patterns to help clarify the purpose and design of routes in the context of HTTP and databases. So again, this is kind of an agreed upon convention. You don't necessarily have to adhere to this, but if you're going to build a CRUD app, which is kind of a buzzword, CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. So if you're creating kind of a basic CRUD application, this is what you want to adhere to. And you're not strictly limited to these 7 RESTful actions, but this is what we're referring to when we talk about a CRUD app. So if you take a look at the screenshot, Kieran, we'll get you straightened out here at the next kind of stopping point. I'll get you up to speed. So the keywords today are RESTful and CRUD. So take a look at that little chart in that screenshot. So we talked on Tuesday about the HTTP verbs. There's a lot of HTTP verbs. These are kind of the greatest hits. These are the ones we're going to be using most frequently. So the HTTP verbs we're going to talk about today and tomorrow, get, post, update, and delete. Now there's 7 RESTful actions as we're going to see. How can we create 7 RESTful actions from only 4 HTTP verbs and create 4 CRUD actions in theory out of those 7 RESTful routes? It's kind of like the 7 loaves and 2 fishes type situation. Like, how am I going to feed all these people? A very similar thing. So how do these HTTP verbs in the CRUD action match up? Well, if you take a look at that first one, when we make a GET request to a given server, that's going to be considered a read CRUD action. So that's the R in CRUD. The RESTful view names that are going to be associated with that are the show view. So the show view is one of something. The index view, we've already built an index view for to-dos, and an index view means all of something. Show me all of my to-dos, kind of like showing an index, show me everything. There's also a new view. So a new view is associated with a form. So consider when you try to create a new profile on a page, there's 2 things involved, right? The first thing you need to do is ask the server to send me an empty form. Kind of like when you go to the doctor's office, right? You go to the window, if you're a new patient, they give you a form to fill out. You fill out the janky information, it takes like 3 hours. Then you should get your insurance card, and then you're not even in the right doctor's office. It's such a mess. But you fill all that information out, you take it back to the person at the window, and they create a new record for you. So there's a GET request and a post request to create that record. There's 2 steps involved. So a new view is going to contain a form for a new to-do, a new user, whatever we're dealing with. The edit view is very similar to new. It's essentially the same form, except an edit will have that information already filled in that form for you to update, right? So if I'm on my Facebook profile and I want to change my email address, update my email address, I go to my profile and all my information is already filled in, right? I just need to go to the specific form field and update the email or the phone number, and then send all that data back to Facebook to update my profile. So here's the big takeaway. Take a look at that chart. What's different from the get HTTP verb and all 3 other HTTP verbs? Do you see anything that like the get has in common that the other 3 do not?
The get is the only one that has views.
Correct. So keep that in your noggin. You can only have a view with a get request. How are we going to send a view? How are we going to send a view back to the server? Or how are we going to delete a view? The only HTTP verb and CRUD action that involves a view is going to be get and read. So keep that in mind. That's why we're only going to be creating 4 views in the umbrella of 7 RESTful actions. So just tuck that away. I think it'll be a little clearer when we start building these out shortly. The HTTP verb for post means you're creating something. If you think of a blog post, you're posting a new blog. There are no views associated with the post. Update would be if I'm updating a piece of information. So an update will be closely related with an edit form, right? So an edit form contains information that already exists for my profile. I just want to update my email address or something. And then a delete doesn't have any view. It's just, I'm just deleting Schmitty from the database. I don't even have a view to render to show me he deleted because I just deleted all of his information. So Mike asks, what are the other 3 actions? So they're actually all right here. So read, these are the 4, the actions are also the name of the views, if that makes sense. So read has 4 actions: show, index, new, and edit. Then there's a post or a create, update, which is also update, and then a delete. So those are the 4 RESTful actions. 4 of them are get, and then the other 3 are update, edit, and delete. Yeah. Keep in mind this. Yeah, go ahead.
What happens if you're, like you mentioned, like delete and update wouldn't have a view associated with it, but if you're like deleting or updating a view that's currently visible, then it would need to somehow affect.
You would use get that edit. If I understand.
Yes, Mike, are you suggesting, well, when I delete something, how do I know where to go next? That kind of thing?
So in the case of our like to-dos app, if you deleted one of them, you would need to somehow update that view. But since the views are not associated with delete, would you need to call the get again?
No, we're going to specifically tell that route, we're going to use something called a redirect. So when I delete something in the response object, I need to render another view. I need to redirect the user somewhere else. So that's how we get around that.
I see.
Yeah, redirect. That's a really good question. What I was saying is keep in mind that, I mean, it took me a little bit, it took me a minute to like absorb and fully understand this RESTful actions, and there's 4 verbs and 4 CRUD actions, but there's 7 RESTful routes and such. So, you know, we're going to walk through all of these over the next 2 days. So if it doesn't initially make sense, that's okay. You guys are going to be building all of your apps going forward. All of your projects will have 7 RESTful actions. That's a requirement. So you're going to get a lot of practice with this stuff. Let me paste in this next screenshot, just a little bit more detail, specifically for the GET request. So today we're only going to be dealing with GET requests in the 4 views. Tomorrow, Colin's going to talk about update, edit, update, delete, and post. Actually, I think we're going to do posts today as well if we have time. But here's another chart just showing how the views correspond with the given RESTful routing. So this first one, we're going to create a view, and this is for any given resource. We're going to use to-do as an example, but this would be the same if we were creating users, if we were creating movies, if we were creating recipes, whatever resource we use. But the show.hbs view, the purpose of that view is to show one resource. So whenever you hear the word show, we're talking about one thing, okay? Show me my profile, or show me the movie, The Matrix. I don't want to see the other 4 or 5 or whatever, just show me the one. So in a blog example, a show would be a page that shows a single blog post, okay? Just like the details of one. And then this is what a route would look like, for example, for a post. Because if we're going to show one of something, we're going to need the ID for that individual object. So next week, when we get into databases, we're going to need to send the ID to the database so that the database knows the information for which precise object we need to return. So in this example, we would do a post / send me the first blog post, or send me the blog post with the ID of 20 if you have 20 blog posts or something. So that route requires an ID. And that's going to be a URL param. So on Tuesday, when we were talking about doing this kind of goofy thing right here, remember like that colon that we'd pass into a route? We're going to be using that with the show route because we need to know the ID for which post or to-do that you want to see. Second one, index.hbs. So when you hear the word index, we're showing all of a given resource, kind of like the index of a book or something, right? Like show me everything. A blog example would be a page that shows all of the blog posts. So maybe when you first go to your blog site, maybe you have all of them and you just can like scroll down like through the past years or something. That'd be an example of seeing all of a resource. And then a RESTful route example for that would just be going to a / posts. And we already see an example of that in our to-dos app, right? We only have one route, one index route. It goes to / to-dos. And then we have a to-dos index view that is specifically only for showing everything. The new view will display a form to create a new instance of something. We're going to create that today. And then an edit, it's pretty much like the new, and 9 times out of 10, it's pretty much the same form. The only difference is that an edit form will already have the information filled in the form, right? Because you're trying to edit something that already exists in the database. So let me fill this form with all of my data so I can update, again, my email or my phone number or whatever. When I get married, I'll change my name. I don't know. And then that's an example of what that route may look like. And now specifically, if we're going to use, so if we're using an edit, we need to get a specific instance of something so that you can edit it. And so look here in Slack, I'll fill this out a little bit more. So in this posts example, we would use kind of that wild card again. And our edit route would look something like this in broad strokes. So go to the posts resource, and then you'd pass in the ID of the specific post that you want to edit. And then you put a / edit at the end. And that's how your app will know the difference between getting the show route for a resource, which is :ID, and the edit route for a resource. We put that / edit at the end of it. And then let me show you this, and then we're going to move forward with our first route. Would you want localhost 3000 posts new? Yeah, so that would be the route for a new post. Yeah, and that's missing. Yeah, I'll throw that in there. That's a good catch. Yeah, so the new route for a post would be / new. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, the last screenshot, and then we're going to start with our show routes. We already have our index route. But this is just a kind of a quick example on a high level, the shells of what each route would look like for posts. So if we were going to create each of these routes, keep in mind this isn't router.get, this is just app.get as an example. But this is what all 7 routes would look like in broad strokes. So you can see the first one is an index route. It's just a / posts. The second one is app.post/new, like Mike mentioned. To get one of something, it would be /posts/:ID, with the ID representing the specific ID of the instance that you're looking for. App.posts, take a look at that one. So notice that .post has the same route as .get. Does that strike anyone as peculiar? Not really. So consider that it's the same route, right? It's /post and /posts. The way that the browser and the server knows the difference is because one is a GET request, one is a POST request. So that's how you're making two different routes from the same /post path. That's kind of the magic of RESTful routing.
And I know you already said it, but what's the difference between doing that get new and the post create?
So when you want to create something, there's two steps involved. The first step is we need to do a GET request to get an empty form. So that's the part, if you go to the doctor's office, you walk to the window,
Got it.
get an empty form to fill out, and then you do a post request, or you take that form with the information back to the window so they can persist it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, perfect. The fifth one is another GET request, so that's what an edit view would look like. Again, I don't mean to be redundant, but an edit is going to be essentially that form, but it's going to have information already built in so that you can edit it, so you can update it, change things if you want. Once you change your update, or once you change that edit form, that app.put, so a put request is when we want to update something. That's the HTTP verb for an update. And then last but not least, app.delete is going to delete it. It's going to get it out of there. And so if you take a look at that path, it's /posts/ the specific ID of the post that I want to delete. So we need to, tell the server which one precisely that we want to delete. So in broad strokes, this is what we're going to be building over the next 2 days. And again, this RESTful routing is a pattern that is going to be pretty much the same in Express, in Rails, the LAMP stack, other stacks. This RESTful convention kind of exceeds the stack specifically. It's kind of a bigger umbrella of a pattern. So the good thing is you're learning it now, and so you're going to be much more flexible wherever you may land. Okay, so we're pretty good on time. I think we can at least get through maybe the first route, maybe the second. But the first route we're going to build is the show route. So remember that the show route, whenever you hear the word show, we're talking about one of something, like show me one thing. We've already built the index for to-dos. And now let's add a route for an individual one. So this is convention. And convention dictates that the show route returns one instance of a given resource. So what I want you guys to do, it'll take maybe 5 minutes or so, using what we learned about those wildcard parameters, remember the :ID, see if you can create a route and a view, so it's going to be both the route and a view associated with it, to render a single to-do from our data.c to to-dos array. And then, for example, take a look at that screenshot. So if you go to localhost 3000 /to-dos/1, you should be able to see that in the browser when you create a view. Don't worry about making a really fancy view or anything. Just write just enough handlebars code to put in the description and that urgency. So let's take, I'll give you guys maybe 10 minutes. And Cody, I don't know if you have breakout rooms still open or available.
Yes.
Sorry, I should have given you a heads up.
No, I
Why
got
don't
it.
we do that? Why don't we, I want to put you guys in the breakouts for like 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and walk through how to build the show route before lunch, okay? So any questions before we hop into breakouts? And you can use your index route in your todos.js as, kind of the template. So to get you started.
Matt is still here. He says there's just like a water or a rain issue in his office.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah, he messaged me. So yeah, I guess he's back now.
Got some leaking going on?
Yeah. Unfortunately, these buildings are very old, and it was like an oh shit moment because I heard it. I just so happened to look up, and it's like right there.
Oh my God.
I have a maintenance guy coming out during lunchtime. Cool. Are we going for?
Yeah, breakouts. I think you have an invite.
Okay, sounds good.
See you in about 10 minutes.
Hey Mark,
Yeah.
recording things in our server JS doesn't make it global, right?
It does not.
Okay. Just because I didn't think so. I think you mentioned it in lecture because I think in like a certain way we require things or export things, it makes it like the folder share it. I think in this instance, not really, just because Audrey had that question. And one of her bugs was she required the data.js in her server.js.
Yeah.
That doesn't cause an issue, but she was just importing it wrong, and I just told her to get rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm updating that right now. It's a little misleading because it does make it global inside the file that you require it, but it's not global in the sense of the entire app. That's really frustrating because I go over these lessons with a fine-tooth comb, and I get really frustrated when there's something messed up in there, and I don't know why that's in there because I've gone through this thing probably 3 times in the past week, and it worked fine. I must have just overlooked it. So don't judge me, Cody. But that drives me nuts because I think students will forgive you if stuff breaks. They won't forgive you if you don't seem prepared, which I don't seem prepared, but I try really hard to make sure shit works all the time, and it usually does. But
it's just learning an appreciation for the art of live coding. That's what it is.
Yeah, I like cowboy coding like the next fella. But yeah, I'm gonna update that README right now.
Yeah. Just looking at Audrey's code, she sent it in the 3 backticks. I think she leaves a lot in there that may or may not break her code.
She leaves the 3 backticks in there, and what?
Well, she sent me her code through that. But just like looking at it, she leaves a lot of things in there. I don't know, maybe that's how lecture was structured, but like routing to controllers now, she still left the app.get and all that code in there. And I'm wondering,
in server.js?
Server.js.
Yeah, she needs to get
out of luck. It's out of luck that it works, just because she put the route app.use for the to-do controllers above it. But like, let's say she got unlucky and just put it below it, right? The app.use, it would not work as intended.
Yeah, the order does matter, but if she still has app.get in her server.js, that's the route that it's hitting. It's never gonna. I don't think it's gonna hit that other route. Or are you saying you required it above it? Hit the to-do controller.
It'll like still work, right? But it won't work the refactored way, like the way she's thinking. Like everything will still appear on the screen, but it's not gonna hit the controller file that we moved everything to. You know.
Well, sorry, did she get it working? Does she need some?
Yeah, she got it working.
Okay.
I'm going to send her a message just to like, I guess, clarify her code, like things that she should comment out and stuff.
Yeah, I specifically told them to cut that route out and paste it in the other one, but and I'm gonna push up my code at lunch, what I have so far, so folks. If they need something for reference. Yeah, maybe I should take the word global out of the lesson where it says like it's going to create a global. Well, but that is kind of true because a var creates a global variable. It's just still global in the context of that file or that. I'll deal with that later. Okay. Yeah, Mike is on top of it, man. He's a sharp cat, in a
Yeah,
good way.
he didn't do the homework yesterday.
He did not.
Or he only did like 2 parts. So he said he didn't get it, but maybe just being lazy.
That's funny. Yeah, I think if anyone may get a little bit of a pass, it's probably him. Actually, time is it? Is 1:18 already?
Yeah.
See, this is a good, like, I wish, because when I teach this in class, I mean, I'm wearing out the blackboard or the whiteboard, like you have room to like draw stuff out. And I think that that's a limitation, not a limitation, but it's just,
It's a
I
con.
think, well, I think it's up to us as instructors, as online instructors, to figure out a better way to convey that information.
Mhm.
I'm not an expert at the little electronic drawing pad. I've tried to use it in the past and it usually just looks like garbage, so I don't use it. But I don't know, like something in real time, like talking about the routes and drawing them out and making a chart is much more effective, in my opinion, than just like pasting a chart and talking about it. I think that's more passive. But you know what, maybe like for tomorrow morning's exercise or maybe tonight, I'll give them a resource and say like, write the 7 restful routes for movies, you know, just pseudo coded or whatever, you know.
I don't know. In terms of debugging, I feel like it's definitely easier to debug in real life.
It's easier to debug in real life.
Yeah.
your-
Not the actual debugging part, but just how many students you can help at once or things upon like that nature. There's only so many screens you can share.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess if a couple of students are having like a similar issue, you can, you know, maybe put them all in one room and.
Yeah.
I think we're cool to close the rooms.
I got what you were saying, Matt.
Welcome back, folks. So was anyone able to implement a version of showing an instance of a to-do? And get it working? Mike?
My server liked it, but my browser didn't.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, 10 minutes isn't, if you guys had a few more minutes, I'm sure you would have cracked it. But let me share my screen and let's just walk through it. I just want to make sure we got one route completed before lunch. We'll have plenty of time this afternoon to knock the rest of these out. The rest of the routes are a little bit more complex than the show. But let me share my screen and let's walk through implementing a show route and then adding a view associated with that. So, give me 1 second here. Okie dokie. Let me show my Atom. Share my Atom.
I just got mine to work.
You did? Sorry, who said that? I just went screen share. Who said they got it to work?
I did.
Oh, Alan?
Yep.
I see Mike's hand right there, but we haven't heard much from Alan today. Alan, why don't you share your screen and we can talk about it? That'd be awesome.
Can you hear me okay? They're blowing leaves outside.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So this is what I have. I looked at the way I got it was I had to kind of understand the structure of this. And yeah, this is my route right here. And this is my show file.
Cool. Let's see it in action.
So there's number 1, number 2.
And what is it doing when you put in like /1/2? Are you like actually hitting a database, or what does that 1 or 2 represent?
It represents the index of the array.
Yeah.
Object.
Yeah, very nice. So we're kind of like faking what a database would do. But in this case, since our seeded to-dos is simply an array of objects, the way that this is set up is when you put /1/2, it's just grabbing that index of the array, of the seeded to-dos array, and returning one. Yeah, that's really great, man. Do you mind stretching out the right-hand side of your Atom a little bit so we can see?
This right here.
Yeah, just so we can see it. Some of it was like wrapping to the next line. Very nice. So get /: name and the name. Yeah, that looks cool.
Yeah, me and David were wondering about that too. Like you mentioned database, so you wouldn't normally be calling this from, or we wouldn't normally be putting our data in a data.js, would we?
No, we're gonna wire up a database next week.
Okay.
But as I mentioned earlier, it's a pretty common thing to have like a seeds file. I mentioned that earlier. So instead of a data.js with those seeded array, seeded to-dos, maybe you want to start out your app with some sort of seeded data. For example, let's say that my app depends on the 50 United States, like in a form or something. Those 50 states would be something that would make sense to hard code in a file because it's not going to change, right? Something like that would be a hard coded example. So if my app breaks, if I need to like redeploy my app or just drop my database and reseed it, that would be an example of some hard coded data that is just like low hanging fruit, right? I'm just going to reinstantiate my database with all the 50 states.
I have a silly question.
No silly questions.
Oh, wait, no. Alan, can you pull it back up? Because it was about your code. I pretty much followed your code up to name and urgent, and I understand, and I think I understand the requirements and the parameter and the name part. I see you're going there, but I don't understand the last part of it where it says description and urgent, because I'm just not following that part. If you can explain it for me, please. Thank you.
So if you look at the way that our data is structured, it's objects inside of an array. And so the first part right here, that's indicating what index of the array you're pulling. And then this right here is the key for the object. So if you were to have a name of 0, it would get this first object right here. And this first line would get the description key, and so return get beer. And then the second line would get the urgent key, and so it would return true.
Hey, Alan, I'm going to send you, we got 1 minute left. I'm going to push up my code to the repo, but let me show you this way of writing that logic inside your route. Grab that code I just put into Slack, comment out your lines 17 through 20, and dump that code in. Again, Alan's code is awesome and it's totally valid and works. This is just maybe another way to do it that wouldn't require that description and urgent square bracket. So in this example, on line 17, I just declared a variable of to-do that's going to go into that data.seeded to-dos array and grab whatever ID you put into the URL. And that's what that request.params.id does. So whether you put in a /1, /2. So it's going to grab that to-do object and assign it to variable to-do. And then what I did on line 20 here is I just sat in my data that I'm sending back with the response. I created a property of to-do, and I'm setting that equal to that single to-do that I declared on line 17. So for this to work, the only thing we would need to fix or change is in your show.hbs. So now you could do to-do.name and to-do.urgent. So sometimes this is so consider if you're playing around in that show.hbs on the front end, name and urgent, sometimes that's a little vague, right? So sometimes it may be a good approach. Alan's approach totally works. I'm just showing you maybe another way, whatever makes sense to you. It may make sense to pass in the name of the variable .urgent. I think actually we may need to do square brackets for that. Let me check. Oh, sorry, it's .description and .urgent first of all. To-dos I show. And then on line 16, description there. Sorry, yeah, I misspelled description there. So DES, yeah. And then if you go to line 16 in your todos.js, so in my code, I use :ID instead of :name. So I think if you update that, we'll be fine. And so refresh your view. I think that'll get it through. Yeah. So consider these are two approaches. Maybe you want to go ahead and parse out the stuff server side, or maybe you want to do it, let a to-do objects, and then you can do what you want with it. Approach you want to use. Really nice work, Alan. That's really nice. So let's put a pin in it there. I'm like 2 minutes over. My apologies. I'm going to push up the version of my code that I have thus far. If you want to look at it over lunch. And then when we come back, Christine, I think she's going to go over homework for maybe 15 minutes. and then we're going to hop into the new, and we'll finish up those routes today. The goal for today is to do 4 routes, and then Colin is going to show you guys the other 3 tomorrow. So this morning, I'll see you guys. We'll come back at 2:32 p.m. So have a great lunch.